Hello and welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, we will be interviewing Dante Washington. Dante Washington is a super close friend of mine. He's a brother to me, and on top of that, he also has a very different background than I do as far as his training, his upbringing in personal protection, and he is the regional director of training for Risk Solutions Unlimited, which is an executive protection, private investigation, security company. And so with that, guys, I hope you enjoy this as much as I do, and let's get into the interview. Hello, and welcome to the Get Real Self-Defense podcast, helping you train today so that you can protect tomorrow. I am Adam, and today I'm joined by literally my best friend and brother, Dante Washington. He is someone that I've known for a long time, and I felt that it is appropriate to have him on the podcast due to the fact that while he and I have done a lot of things together over the last couple of years, we've done things separately, and he's actually gone in and made a name for himself in the security space, as well as just all the training that he's doing. So I wanted to pick his brain, and I wanted to share that with you guys at the same time. So Dante, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, like you said, I'm Dante Washington. I specialize in essentially private security, whether that be self-defense, de-escalation tactics, or familiarizing myself with the regions that I'm in. Particularly right now, I specialize in social services, dealing with the houseless community, people that suffer from substance abuse and like severe traumas or traumatic brain injuries. So, yeah, that's really what I've been leaning into as of now.
Nice, man. So I guess where did y'all start? Did you just go right into security? Were you like, I mean, how did that all happen for you? Like, why did they make that choice?
So initially I've done security. I did some bouncing. Once I was around 21, I knew some of the owners of the nightclubs that we lived around in Bellingham, and I had a pretty good natural inclination towards it. I enjoyed it. After that, I always just kind of was in martial arts, did some gigs that were private security with some people like Craig Nolan, a few others. And really what ended up happening is after I got out of the military, I ended up getting a call from Mick Jolly. And he essentially said, hey, I need some guys, I need some bodies and some people that actually know what they're doing. Would you be interested in helping, doing some security for a bit? And initially I was just planning on like, oh, look, he's like family. He's always looked out for me. So I'm just going to help him out for a couple months. And a couple months turned into 5 months, and then 5 months turned into this new gig at a facility called 22 North. And I just started really enjoying getting into that avenue of work. I felt like I was good at it. I had a passion for it. It allowed me to interact and help people. I've always been a protector. And I felt like my gifts were being utilized properly. So I kind of just leaned into that, full sent it, and now it's been around 2 years working with them, and I haven't looked back.
Nice. So I guess, it's interesting that you say that you've always been a protector. So like one of the things that I've tried to talk about in the podcast is how we get into that mental state of knowing how to approach really stressful situations. We've talked about in the podcast mental rehearsal, resiliency, and all those kind of things. How did you come to find out, like, you were like, I am a protector, I had that mentality? Like, how did that come to that point where you were able to acknowledge that for yourself?
For me, at least personally, it was an identifier that made me want to strive to be a better person. So by nature, I would say that I'm not a good person, right? But when I learned that, when I was given responsibilities at a young age, I thrived once I did those things. I succeeded, and it felt like I was contributing in a way that was unique to myself, which is a really big thing. It's a problem I think we have today, where people are, especially men, are given options to basically live in a baser state, like simple pleasures. Mind you, I love video games. I'm just using this as an example, but there's a lot of men our age that will only video game. They'll only stay inside of their little bubble because it's immediate pleasure. It's simple dopamine. It's something that they can just do easily. That happens, or it's a contributing factor, because a lot of times those people weren't given responsibility or a means to say like, hey, look, this is what a man is. This is my ownership, right? So I learned at a young age that when I had those responsibilities, I felt like a good person. I felt stronger. It forced me to rise to the occasion in every aspect in which I was taking those responsibilities, and I loved it. So I've always wanted to help people. It just seems like to me, my talents and proclivities lead towards a more an approach that actually involves security.
Sure.
So
Sure.
yeah.
So as far as that goes, I mean, you talked about your talents. Like,
hmm
are these talents, were these things that just inherently came out? Like, what are those talents? What do you mean?
I would say those talents in general were part of it was nature and nurture, right? Whether that be my family having a background in some not so ideal proclivities, whether that be some gang activity, violence, aggression, things like that. Mind you, a lot of them are different now. A lot of them found God, pursued other passions, etc. But I learned at a young age and was observed at a young age an environment like that, which led me to believe I needed to prepare. So um, my normal situation was going over to my cousins with David and Tyson, and I'd have a baby cousin that was my age, and they'd put wraps on us because we couldn't afford boxing gloves, and we'd be scrapping. Like, so we learned to fight at a very young age. Learned that was the way we did things. This was how you
Mhm.
protected your family. So it was just kind of really bred into me, right? But it was something that I felt like it was natural as well. And when I was able to actually put that talent into a positive environment where I was getting rewarded for it, it changed things like fundamentally
Mhm.
for me. So
So that actually, and this is not something that I'm necessarily trying to get into because I know it's
yeah.
extremely personal. But I know that for you, I mean, it's not like you had just a great family life all the time or upbringing. I know there was a
hmm
lot of rough things that happened. And,
Yeah.
it wasn't like just sunshine and rainbows. You went to a karate school and learned skill sets. It was like
hmm
you had to learn almost, as they say, in the school of hard knocks. So it's interesting to hear that, like, once you were given responsibility, that helped kind of change your mindset a little bit about how to apply what you've had to do.
Yeah.
As far as like learning how to scrap, as you say, how to fight to
hmm
keep yourself safe or others safe. Did with that, did you ever start formally training? Like, when did that start happening for you, like off and on?
Formally training, it depends on what you consider formally training.
Mhm.
So I've been doing wrestling since I was like 9, like through
Mhm.
school formally. I actually started boxing around 11 as well with my dad, Augustine. I have 2 dads. My
Mhm.
other dad, John Christopher Washington, or Big Nuck, he had taught me Wing Chun, and I had watched every video of Mike Tyson with details from him on like why you did the peekaboo stance, what an uppercut was, all these things. So I've been involved in martial arts in some way, shape, or form for a majority of my life that I can remember.
Mhm.
So I've done some karate, I've done Wing Chun, I've done Chinese Kempo, I've done some Muay Thai, Jiu Jitsu, um, firearm trainings, military as well. So it's
Sure.
just been a lifestyle choice, to be honest.
Yeah. So how does that you've gone through several different flavors, so to speak,
Yeah.
and one of the things that that you didn't mention that wasn't really any sort of training, but I thought was always a strong point for you was
hmm
your charisma. So like,
Mm.
and I summarize it as charisma because
Yeah.
it I distinctly remember when we first started hanging out back at the Northwest Washington Fair. That was one of the few times,
Yep.
one of the first times we actually seriously hung out. And
hmm
as we're actually, I think this was prior to us hanging out. This was, I just came across you in passing after that quinceanera we had.
Oh yeah. Yep.
It was, I came across you in passing.
hmm
We were there, and I said hi to you. And in the 5 minutes that I was talking to you, you had like 7 or 8 different people come up and say hi
hmm
to you and talk to you and all that stuff. And it was just kind of funny seeing all these different people just coming up to you. It was like, I'm like, is this guy a celebrity? Like, why do people remember this guy? And then come to find out, it's just you're just really you're attentive to people, you pay attention to people,
hmm
you're, like I said, you're charismatic because of the fact that you pay attention, you listen, and you speak with them, and you take that time.
hmm
So the reason why I bring that up is because amongst all your physical skills, working in security, how often have you used your verbal skills versus physical skills? Like, when do you make that decision? Can
Single
you
most
explain maybe
important skill
some?
for security.
Say that again.
The single most important skill for security, I would
Is
say.
the verbal?
Yeah, I would say second most important skill. First and most important skill is your ability to observe a situation and be analytical about it, whether that be somebody's stance, this literally the things around you, whether that be glass, weapons, like other people that are taking notice of the conversations you're having. But second to that would be your communication skills,
Mm.
bar none. It's gotten me out of way more fights than my hands ever have. Like, don't get me wrong. I've had people try to stab me in the throat with flathead screwdrivers, put guns in my face, knives. I've dealt. Sorry there. Um, yeah, so I've dealt with all of those things. My
Mm.
capacity to be able to communicate and get my point across in a warm way and being able to speak in love is what the term I try to use,
Mm.
has allowed me to alleviate so many more problems. And like you said, honestly, charisma is everything. It's kind of honestly, I think it's slept on. I think it's a superpower that everyone should be investing in. There's so many books, different videos that you can watch that help you teach you how to speak, how to communicate, eye contact, that confidence, talking with a vibrato, in your chest. There's so many different ways to do that. And I also think, to be frank, one of the most important things about charisma is just talking to people how you would have wanted to be seen. I dealt with a lot of different kinds of things like bullying once I was younger, just feeling not enough. I unfortunately, in a lot of the schools that I went to, was like one of 5 or 6 black kids. So I had some racial bias that was going towards me, whether that be verbal or physical altercations that occurred. And I knew what it felt like to feel less than. So anytime you see me talking to somebody, I really don't care who it is. I want to leave that conversation with them feeling like they have value, which is why people try to go out of their way to say hi to me, I think, because I make them feel like uh, I would liken it to a campfire. Everyone wants to be by the campfire to stay warm, right? If I can be that campfire for somebody,
Mm.
I'm gonna do it. So
Sure. So, do you have any example of like when you had to really use that listening and verbal skill with somebody while you're working security, and then maybe after that, maybe share like a time where you tried to use that and it just didn't work, and then what you had to do then?
yeah. So I'll leave names out of
Sure.
courtesy for the individual because we're a lot of the houseless community that we interact with. I consider them friends. We try to get them off the streets, do our best. They're still part of our community, right? There was a situation where there was an individual that had a razor blade and the other person had a hatchet.
Mm.
And things had just been escalated because one of the individuals was just having some pretty bad suicidal thoughts, decided to start an altercation. And I was able to, with another guard, have a conversation with the person using some intimate knowledge about their kids and saying, like, hey, look, is this really how you want them to remember you? You're
Mm.
talking about death by cop, all these things. So I was able to glean what really would hit home for them. That's one, assessing the situation, and two, talking with a level of kindness. A lot of people, sometimes once they do security, they decide that this is the voice they're going to use, right? Like they're going to be a prick, they're going to be all gung ho, just really intense. And
Hmm.
a lot of times, if you can talk to somebody on their level, it's so much more disarming. Like our job in security isn't to incite violence, right? It's
Yeah.
trying to alleviate that at first.
Mm.
So I think too many people walk into security thinking that it's the military again, right? Where you shoot first, ask questions later kind of mentality. I know that's not quite the
Hmm.
way we're taught, and I'm not going to say we're taught that way, but a lot of times it's, aggression is our knee jerk response to things. And in security, customer service should be the first and foremost, depending on what kind of security you do, mind you. If we're doing private details or something like that for a high end client, different story, right? But in
Hmm.
general, that's how I would approach that. So, anyways, that's the situation where me being able to be charismatic, being able to communicate, I was able to actually de-escalate a situation. And again, this person genuinely wanted the cops there so that they could run up the cops with a razor blade so that they would get shot and killed.
Yeah.
Right. I was able to alleviate that situation without even putting my hands on him. He ended up giving me the razor blade. I got the hatchet from the other individual, and things were good. And after that, I was able to establish a relationship with somebody that didn't have a lot of people that they could talk to, which has paid dividends for me in the now. Now, a situation where that didn't work out was I'll give an example. I was at a facility. I can't really name the facility.
Sure.
And this person had just recently got, he wasn't permitted to enter the building anymore. He was very upset. I just got off shift. Actually, I was in my gym clothes. I was about to go to
I
the gym.
hate that, man. I hate it when
Yeah.
you get off shift and then you get
And
called back.
and I'm walking out. Well, I'm literally walking out of it, right? And I see this man try to walk in while I'm walking out, and these are barred doors. And I'm like, "Hey, you can't be in here, man. Like, you already know you need to be outside." And he starts getting very aggressive. I'm like, "Look, man, you need to calm down. We can talk about this outside, though. You got me messed up. These lovely ladies in here, you're not going to terrorize them. You're not going to scare them, and you're not going to bully them while I'm not here. So we're going to go talk outside." And he literally was like, "You're not going to talk to me like that." And he got really mad. And I was like, "Look, man, I'm not talking to you any type of way, but you do need to leave." And he had a flathead screwdriver. This thing was about 1.5 feet long. It was huge. And he proceeded to try to stab me in the throat. So I ended up having to block it, and unfortunately had to neutralize the target and put him down. He's okay now. He's fine. And I ended up physically removing him from the building while he was on, incapacitated on the ground. But this was one of those situations where I was literally in a small enclosed area. My de-escalation tactics wouldn't work. This person was on some pretty heavy substances, and he had some pretty bad mental issues. Mm-hmm. So he was not hearing me. Like, I could tell once I was talking to him that he was just ready to fight. What I was hoping was that he wasn't going to stab me with the screwdriver, but I guess things happen. So there are situations where words will fail you, which is why it's so important to train. You have to sharpen your weapons. And by your weapons, I mean your self-defense tactics, your de-escalation tactics, and anything that you might need to use in your day-to-day life.
Absolutely, man. I think that's the interesting thing is, really it's about transitions. I mean, as you know, like in wrestling, like transitions are almost more important than any other position, because people can lay there and do something, but you have to, in order to be able to transition to another position. And it's the same thing with de-escalation or situational awareness or like overall physical hand-to-hand skills. You have that, you have the situational awareness, but when do you transition to physical hand-to-hand or doing de-escalation? And then at de-escalation, I'm sure, like from what it sounds like, and knowing what I know about you, you already knew, and like you said, you already knew this guy was not listening to you. You still tried to de-escalate, but you were already preparing to put that guy, in the dirt, as you're still trying to de-escalate. And so, that you're already transitioning in your head at that moment, like to go to the next step. You'd flip to that gear you just hadn't engaged yet. And so, I think that's something for listeners and viewers to know, is that your transition and preparing for that next step is every bit as important as the action itself, if not more important. Because
it's the most important. Like you said, I could learn 100 different things. If I don't know how to apply and transition from one to the other, though, it's irrelevant. Because when shit hits the fan, man, you have to be able to transition. You have to be able to have the presence of mind to say, okay, this isn't working. What's my next step? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So again, it's good that you hit that, like you hit the nail on the head on that. That's why you train so many times. Like the way I train in plenty of different positions, different verbal altercations, all these things, because you have to be able to float betwixt all of your tools. If you're only stuck on the bat and you need some scissors, you know what I mean? You don't just use the bat to cut a piece of paper.
Well, I know that when, in training, back when I did police academy, they had, we had this individual, again, like you said, not naming names. They're not there anymore, but they were trying to do a de-escalation of a person who was supposed to be in this mock scene on some sort of narcotics or drugs or crazy or something. It was some sort of, just issue with mental health. And they had a baseball bat in their hand, and there's people around, and they were trying to get this individual to get off of just saying, drop the bat, drop the bat, drop the bat, drop the bat. I mean, they just never moved out from that. And that person was like walking towards them. They weren't thinking about moving or cover or like, anything like that. So, and it was a training opportunity. I mean, you're not going to do everything.
Yeah, it's a learning experience.
But the idea was that it just like you said, if you're not planning or thinking about your next step or where that's going to go, or okay, if they drop the bat, what next? I mean, what are you going to do next? Or if they don't drop the bat, or if they do drop the bat and then they decide to pick it up, or they pull out a knife. I mean, you
Yeah.
have you have to kind of like not gamify it, but like expect, hey, things aren't going to go my way. If things go this way, I got to make this decision.
It's hypervigilance, and again, I hope for the best, but I always prepare for the worst. So in my head, I'm going up, I'm smiling. There is genuine intent. I'm trying to make this an agreeable situation, but I know dang well sometimes that that's just not going to happen. So I'm already equipped and prepared to neutralize my target in whatever way I see fit. Right? I think that's a very important thing, and it's a reality. Like, do I wish I never had to put my hands on somebody? 100%. I'm not a bully. I don't like having to impose my will on somebody in that way. That's just not my style. But if push comes to shove and you're in the wrong, I'm gonna have to address the situation, right?
Sure.
Got to be a realist.
So how has it been working with talking about skill set? There's a lot of discussion on self-defense and martial arts and what's the most predominant skill set you should learn. And they talk about how 80% of fights go to the ground, so on and so forth. And every person's different, obviously. But in your experience, what, aside from the de-escalation, if we're talking about physical skills, what have you used the most often in your security gigs where you do have to use force or get physical? What movements or skill sets, or do you pull from wrestling the most? Do you pull from some sort of boxing the most? Like what do you decide is like the most helpful for you, or that you use the most often?
Wrestling has taught me good mechanics. I would argue that that's something I use the most in terms of where my mind state is at. There's a certain mindset you get once you're wrestling, learning your transitions, what's the next move. You're just going. Your cardio, the mental capacity of a wrestler is just bar none, in my personal opinion, the greatest pillar for a true warrior or a true fighter or someone that deals with security, any of these things. But that being said, in regards to what actual sequences I use, some of these sequences are kind of generalized, but they would be different forms of standing arm bars, joint manipulation with the fingers or the wrists. The reason why you do these things is because you can fully control this person from a safe distance. You neutralize the other arm at that point. And also, honestly, it's for optics. I steer clear of rear naked chokes just because they look bad. If a general civilian, especially in Bellingham, Washington, comes up and sees me choking a dude out, regardless of what that dude was doing to me, it looks like I'm the culprit at this point, right? So that's something that's pretty unique to security in comparison to a general civilian. We have to be aware of those situations, right? And what looks good and what looks presentable. Like, can I defend myself in court or in a civil suit if this occurred, right? So that being said, a lot of those locks for the arms, joints, and everything like that, they're also you can provide a restraint to somebody, a pain compliance to somebody, and as long as you're careful, it's not permanent damage, right? Which is why I think those things are so important. Now, this is also why, again, I'm not bashing jiu-jitsu. I've done jiu-jitsu before. I think there's a time and place for it. It's an excellent sport. And if you're just a general civilian, you want to learn something, it's cool. It's good. But as far as optics go, I'm just giving you examples. If you're really in a fight for your life, if somebody tries to pull me into like a rear naked choke, get my back or something like that, one, the type of person I am, I'm always rolling with some boys, always. And if you're solely targeted, your legs are locked around my abdomen, and you have both arms locked on this dude's neck, what happens when my boy comes in and stomps you out?
Yeah.
You have no other means of defense because you're completely and exclusively focused on one person. Now, again, another example, what happens if the guy that you're rear naked choking just decides to pull out a knife out of his pocket, and guess what? You can't see it.
Yep.
Like, there's so many, to me, there are so many situations where jiu-jitsu, which again, it's excellent in sport too, it's a really great sport, it falls short. And I try to caution people, when you're doing a fight out on the streets, if I had to pick, I wouldn't do boxing either. But if I had to pick between boxing and jiu-jitsu, I'm going to pick boxing because, one, I can neutralize one threat and I can immediately assess the situation for another one. That's what's important. You never know what you're running into. So why would you set yourself up for failure and just assume that this is just going to be a clean one-on-one? This isn't a sport. Like, you guys aren't going, okay, no groin kicks, no punches in the throat. don't let your boys jump me. No, you're out on the streets. You're in danger. This person's trying to harm your life or take your life.
Sure.
You know, why would you operate in the parameters of a sport, which is what jiu-jitsu does, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
I definitely see what you
again,
mean.
things that focus, elbow joints, you know. So those are the things I've used the most, though. Finger locks, elbow joints, shoulder rotator cuffs, things like that. Something that I can neutralize the target. It allows me to keep visual on my surroundings, and then at that point, I can push them away. And if you're a general civilian, after I push them away, I've got space to run. You know, you don't need to be, Walker Texas Ranger, like, Bruce Lee or whoever's in your head and finish this fight like that. No, the result and the idea is for you to survive the encounter.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I see what you mean. Like when it comes to, especially multiple attacker scenarios, the saying that I always was raised up on is a poor set of feet lets a body get beat. And so like, one-on-one, I mean, that's one thing, but if you have multiple people, there's other people on the street that'll step in and do something. I know that very rarely am I ever walking around by myself. I mean, there's usually you're usually with somebody, or there's somebody that knows you. That will try to assert themselves, or even random strangers will sometimes try to get in the middle of things. And it's like, what are you doing? So, yeah, definitely. I would actually almost go, I've been back and forth on martial arts, and self-defense and what kind of baseline martial art I would want to learn if I had to pick anything and nothing else. I mean, for me, like, it's definitely like a tie, like you said, between like ground game. Like I would almost think wrestling or boxing, or a little bit of both at the very least, just to have that understanding of mechanics, like you said, and base and balance and things like that. But then also like have the movement, punching skills. So if we're talking about two sports, those are the two that I'd probably want to learn if I had to do it all over again.
Yeah.
If I had to pick something quick.
Yeah, if I didn't have to worry about optics, boxing and wrestling would be a healthy dose of both of those. Would be what I encourage people to learn. Me, again, like I'm trying to avoid having to knock somebody out or do any kind of damage like that, just because I do know how to punch. There's a lot of dangers and liability.
Yeah, I know you know how to punch. I know you know how to punch. For sure.
But yeah, I'd agree. For a general individual trying to learn, you're going to get the most from both of those sports. And like the reason why you want wrestling, one, again, like I said, it's the mentality, and two, it's to prevent you from getting taken down. It's actually the defense portion of wrestling that you're going to actually be utilizing in a lot of those scenarios, because a lot of people, again, try to take you down to the ground. That's not an inaccurate statement once they said like 80% of fights go to the ground. A lot of fights do go to the ground. What you're wanting to do is utilize your tools, though, right? Which is your hands at that point. So what you're going to do is use that wrestling to counter that, and then be able to utilize and punish afterwards. So
definitely. So how, what are you doing right now as far as training goes? Like, I mean, you said you did some jiu-jitsu, you did some boxing and stuff. What are you doing right now? Are you doing it on your own time, or is it like something that the security company is having you guys do? Like, what's going on with that?
Well, me being the chief director of this private security company, what I actually specialize in is the self-defense tactics, the curriculum that we teach them, whether that be de-escalation or otherwise. So I'm actually in charge of those things. So technically that's in my wheelhouse. So whatever I choose, or whatever I deem as a necessary curriculum, I'll teach my guys. And then I'll create a course, make sure that they learn the course, and then visit back with them on it. Now, as far as what I do, I'm training 3 times a week minimum. That's outside. I do the gym every day. I do the firing range like at least once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks tops. But what I actually do right now is a practical application of Wing Chun. A lot of people give it a bad rap, but it actually has some excellent isolation techniques that you can use in security, that allow you to neutralize your target without causing permanent damage, as well as teaching you some lethal techniques as well. And what I'm doing right now is there's a great teacher. His name's Martin. He actually teaches you Seat Lao with Wing Chun, and Wing Chun is based off of your upper body for the most part. Seat Lao focuses on your lower body, and that allows you to do like different leg locks while you're actually punching. So it's a perfect like combination that couples. So I actually do that twice a week, and then I actually do a weapons class on Fridays, which teaches you how to use sticks, axes, 2 or 3 different types of knives, whether that be karambits or like a classic K-bar. doing 2 of 12, 3 of 9, like you learning all these vital points and areas to actually eliminate your target or neutralize your target. I should say neutralize. That's a proper term.
Yeah, we're not in the
Yeah,
military anymore. We don't say
yeah.
eliminate.
So 3 times a week at least, I'm doing martial arts in a setting where I have a sifu or a teacher, and then I train almost every day, whether that be just in my day to day, just training my punches, whatever it is. I'm always doing something.
Gotcha. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting that you said, like, you're working knives and sticks and all those things. I
Hmm.
mean, statistically speaking, most of the time, we're never even going to get to that point.
Hmm.
Even guns, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I made a podcast episode about guns and how guns are important and why people should carry one. But at the same
yeah,
time, statistically speaking, most of the time, we're never even going to get to that point. So, why
yeah.
for you?
Chances are
Why?
your encounter aren't going to happen like
Yeah.
that.
So, why is it that you train those things anyways, if statistically you're not even going to use them that often?
Because again, I live my life always saying like I would rather be prepared and equipped to deal with whatever. Why? I would never go through life just hoping that things will just turn out, right? It's the same reason why you hedge your bets, your investments, all of these things, right? Are you just doing it and just going high risk all the time? Chances are you're probably not. You're always
Mhm.
going to prepare for the worst, make sure you have some like steady stocks as well as some high risk stocks. It's the same situation here where like I'm going to set myself up for success in any scenario. So if knives do come out, I'm like, okay, these are my basic knife defenses. I protect my vitals. I make sure that I block the arm going down so that they don't freaking cut my, you know what I mean, like across the
Mhm.
tracks. All these things. It allows me to walk into an environment completely confident, and that's so important in security. Don't come in with an ego, but come in with confidence. Me knowing if I just walk into whatever situation, that I'm like, okay, whatever occurs here, I'm ready for it on
Mhm.
some degree. That allows you to do your job in a much better setting. You give off that confidence, you exude it, and you're also just setting yourself up for success in the people you're working for. So again, prepare for the worst in every scenario.
Sure. So how about on, you have your security
Hmm.
mentality, but for when you're on the job,
Hmm.
does that change at all when you're off the job on your own time? Like, how do you approach things when you're on your own, just, off work, basically?
Uh, I would say generally speaking, it it changes things to a degree, but I'm now in a position in the security company that I do value. And even once I'm not working, there's optics that I have to respect just because I'm a known figure where I'm from, where I'm at. So if I decide to, instead of putting somebody in armbar that I was perfectly capable of putting them in an armbar and then pushing them away, decide to break the person's jaw, um, people know what I'm capable of and how I could have neutralized that otherwise. So once I choose not to do that, that could reflect poorly on my job, even though I'm not working necessarily.
Sure.
So
No,
that being
absolutely.
said, I have to be kind of hyper aware. Probably the same with your job, given your training and the background and what you do. You have to carry yourself a certain way, regardless of whether or not you have a badge on. You know.
Yeah.
Um, so unfortunately, that is something that I full well know that I should do that, and I respect that. So for the most part, I try to stay in the same vein. I will say I would be my de-escalation tactics are different though.
Mm.
If I'm off site and you're not somebody that's going through like a mental crisis, I'm probably going to check you pretty quick and say like, hey man, like this is really not a good idea. I really encourage you to stop because if you don't, like you're only getting one warning. Whereas prior to that, if I was on the job, I'd give somebody 2, 3 warnings until they put their hands on me, right?
Mm.
Um, so I think my de-escalation tactics are a little bit drawn back. I'm a little bit more less reserved in my hostility. But as far as like what I would actually do, it's kind of still in the same vein, just because I have too much respect for the people I work for,
Sure.
and where my position's at already.
No, for sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, it's the same thing with, like you said, with my job. It's,
Hmm.
when I'm off work, I still got to carry myself the same
Hmm.
way as if I was on work.
Yep.
And it even goes where, even when I'm carrying, I have to consider, like, it actually is almost in some ways, I would, on my off time, I'd almost want to do less in some respects. Like,
Yeah.
what I mean is, but honestly, I can't. Like, not too long ago, we had a
Hmm.
situation where I was getting ready for jujitsu class. I've been doing jujitsu,
Hmm.
and just to do something else. And
Yeah,
while
absolutely.
that's going on, I'm getting ready for class. We're an hour early. So we decided to take the kids to the park. And at the park, there's some old lady that starts actually attempting to strangle like a 14-year-old girl that wasn't related to her in any way.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah. I had just taken my kid to the bathroom, come back out, and
Hmm.
my wife comes out and says, "Hey, like, this happened, and
Hmm.
they're over there." And I said, "Well, shoot, like, I'm, I'm like, I'm a cop, but I'm off duty, because I'm
Yeah.
a cop, I should probably go see, even though for
Yeah,
me personally, I'd
absolutely.
probably be like, man, not my game. Like, I'm just gonna
Hmm.
call 911 and go home."
Yep.
So for me, it's almost like I have to sometimes.
You're held to a different standard, it feels like.
Yes, but it's like I'd sit there and I'd much rather just not sometimes, do that. But honestly, too, with family, let's say that there was like a shooter at the park. Obviously, I'm going to prioritize my family, get my family to safety, then go
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
But like
Like that.
at that moment, it was like I got off work just a little bit ago, and now I gotta do more work.
Hmm.
And luckily, I didn't have to do too much, but because the situation had already ended, and it was just a bunch of yelling and stuff, and the
Okay.
person fleeing the scene. But it was still like, oh my gosh, like I have to do something.
Yeah, you
Um,
can't turn it off sometimes. It just kind of sucks, or you never really can.
no,
Things always seem to find you.
yeah. So with that being said, as far as like security and stuff, let you have this background. You were in some ways. I mean, you didn't have necessarily a blessed life upbringing the whole time. There was a lot of struggle. There was a lot of
Mhm. Yeah,
negative things that
I
happened.
have wonderful memories, but yeah, there's definitely
Yeah,
struggles for sure.
sure. There was
I
negative
have
things that
wonderful
happened,
parents.
just like in anybody's life. Things where you were just like,
Hmm.
or even just trauma or anything else. But with that being said, for those that, you had an advantage in some ways where you grew up like learning boxing and doing jujitsu early on and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So for people that, and I was the same way, as like growing up, I
Hmm.
had my pops, to teach me a lot of this
Absolutely.
stuff and rub shoulders with a lot of giants that I
Hmm.
now stand on their shoulders for. But as far as somebody who's listening who doesn't have that advantage or that background,
Hmm.
um, how does that look as far as like what would you suggest if somebody who's brand new is like, hey, I want to learn how to be like a security guard for myself and for my family. What should I prioritize? How am I going to do it? I don't have a lot of time. I'm super busy. Like, all the
Hmm.
excuses that may come about. What would you say to somebody as far as like how to get them started and on training or to continue their training?
It depends on what avenue of security they're wanting to do. Are we talking like general security where you're just like watching like a food co-op or something outside? Are we talking about like private details? Are you wanting armed security? Like, because all of those,
Sure.
I would probably recommend different things, to be honest.
So let's talk about, for instance, let's start with just general Joe Schmo civilian, just the
Okay.
regular person, and then
Mm.
go to somebody who maybe is in security or wants to get into security. Let's talk about both. If you are not a security guard, how would you want somebody to learn, or what would you recommend to that person? Let's say it's one of your family members that's just to say,
Okay.
Dante, I want to learn how to make myself safer. You have all this experience. What should I learn? What should I prioritize? What should be my bare minimum standard? And what should I
Okay.
pursue? And then we can go into some of those that may have that job
Hmm.
where they are in security or want to get into security. So let's start with someone who has no experience in security and is just a regular civilian.
Okay. Yeah. So, in my opinion, what I would do first is, at least if I anything that I ever do once I get into a new situation and I'm doing security, I'll give you an example. We went to Renton to do a risk assessment a couple months ago or a month ago,
Mhm,
right? Whenever I
mhm,
do something like that, I do my research. So the general points that I'm going to want to look at are, what things should I learn to make myself relevant here, right? So if you're just getting into security, what I would recommend you do is find out if there's a homeless population or a houseless population. Find out what kind of social services are available for them. In that regard, I would want to learn how to talk to these people, right? So for me, I know, for instance, there's an individual named Ryan Dowd who's incredibly knowledgeable in terms of how the brain works underneath trauma, what happens to people that suffer from houselessness, substance abuse, all these things. He has training programs and courses, right? Some of them are even free. If somebody came into the office and said, hey, look, I don't have a lot of experience, but I have done like 5 hour courses pertaining to Ryan Dowd, I'd be like, holy crap, that's fantastic. Like, you've shown me a lot of effort. And now you're telling me that you already know that you're catering to a certain audience that you know you're going to be interacting with. That's the same thing with gang activity, anything like that. So if I go into a place, end up talking to we'd say BPD, and they say, hey, look, Las Zetas, MS-13, and the Bloods are our biggest problems. I would then do research on those different gangs, trying to figure out what their affiliations are, what kind of substances, what kind of trades that they get involved in. I would do those sorts of things just so that I could be able to come in and say, hey, look, this is what I'm familiar with, right? In terms of just like a general security off the ground. I wouldn't actually focus on self-defense tactics or anything like that in terms of like physical self-defense. My reason for saying that is because any security company that's worth their salt, and if you're trying to get into it, they should have a program or they should have a trainer like myself that's going to be teaching you and equipping you to do your job properly to begin with. So I am much more impressed with people that come in with a base knowledge on how to de-escalate, as opposed to someone that comes in and says, oh yeah, I've been doing this for 6 years. You know, I've done Kyokushin or this or that. Or that. It's like, okay, that's really cool. That actually worries me now, because you think that kicking somebody in the face at this job is actually a good idea.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? And anyways, I'm going to have you throw that out the window, because I'm going to be teaching you exclusive moves and techniques that you're going to be using while you're working with us. And if you use something outside of those parameters, I'm going to ask you why the hell you did that.
Sure.
Just because it's bad optics. So you kicking somebody in the face with a roundhouse kick, cool. It's cool. You're safe. They're knocked out in a broken jaw, but guess what? You didn't survive the fight. A term that I like to use all the time. I learned this from a guy named Michael Hasselbrook. Excellent firearm trainer, wonderful guy. It's survival. There's 3 ways you survive. Could you survive it physically, mentally, and financially? If any one of those aren't checked, you didn't survive that fight. If you kick somebody in the face, you dislocate their jaw. It might not hold up in any sort of court aside from a civil suit, but if you got a civil suit for $50,000 on a security guard's, like an entry-level security guard's wages, you're screwed. You didn't survive that fight. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that's why I actually don't condone people to necessarily lean into learning some form of martial arts when getting into security first.
Sure.
That should be your first red flag, like I said, if you're getting into a security company and they don't actually have those means, because what that tells you is they're hiring Paul Blart or mall cops, and they don't know what they're doing. They're just trying to give the minimum charge and providing the minimum assistance once they're working for somebody. And that's actually how you tell the difference between a relevant company that's actually moving somewhere and, like I said, the Paul Blarts. So
sure. So how about somebody who's not going to be a security guard, but wants to be like a security guard for themselves? Like, hey, I'm dad. I have, 3 kids at home and 1 on the way, and I want to become safer. Dante, what do you suggest based off of your experience I should know or prepare so I can be my own security guard or my own personal bodyguard for myself and my family? How would you go about, giving them guidance on that?
At that point, there'd be 2 avenues. It would depend on what you want to do. If you're a law-abiding citizen that wields a firearm, I would say investing in some proper firearm training would be the first and foremost, because regardless of what anyone says, firearms, weaponry, it's a form of martial arts. Bottom line.
Yeah, the
You're
art of
learning your
Kung Fu
tools.
Pao.
You're learning how to utilize them properly, sequences. So I would actually have them invest in getting some training. And also, for instance, I'll use this in an example of this again. Michael Hasselbrook, he teaches a class. He's a firearm instructor that says the law in you. It teaches you when you can utilize your firearm, like when it's okay, what is considered brandishing, all of those kinds of things, whether it be at your house or outside or otherwise. So he's familiarized himself with the state laws and the city laws so that he can actually give those to somebody else so that they can glean that knowledge and then make their own assessments when situations like that happen. That would probably be the first thing that I recommend. Now, if you are either somebody that doesn't feel comfortable with firearms or just don't want to go that route, again, firearms are the great equalizer, right? Then I would say, as far as self-defense goes, I would probably lean into a discipline that is focused on real life tactics. So I wouldn't even necessarily tell them like, hey, go do wrestling. Hey, go do boxing. There are some courses or classes exclusively in certain gyms that they'll actually teach you like real life applications for self-defense. So they'll teach you how to do groin kicks and, like I said, joint manipulations on the elbow or the fingers, things like that. Like that would be your single most important thing to learn how to do first. And then after that, you can start to polish it up, learn how to actually cover up in boxing, learn how to sprawl so you can do a takedown defense. Like that's once you start to kind of build your arsenal up. But first and foremost, you need to be able to neutralize a threat to where you can hold them down, still stay up, be vigilant, get your family out of there, and then at that point push them away and say, "Hey, man, I don't want any problems."
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I would approach it.
No, that's excellent. So, I guess what about I guess for you, let's say you get, for those that may be listening that are at that point where they got some training, they got some experience, like, okay, I understand de-escalation to some degree. I understand situational awareness and whatnot. What do you think has been, because you've gotten to that point where you have that experience, what has been the most beneficial training, or what has changed in your mindset with training since then? Because it sounds like you put in a lot of time. You put in 3 days a week at the minimum. And so it sounds like what you've done is make it a very intentional plan as far as what you want to work on. And so with someone who doesn't have a lot of time to work on those things, is there anything that you suggest that they can do at home or learn at home that, in case they just don't have a lot of time to go to like a gym or to a martial arts studio or whatever?
Yeah, YouTube. You can find anything on the internet, to be honest. You can have free jujitsu classes. There's free self-defense classes. There's classes that teach you about body armor. Like anything and everything that you want, you have access to at the tip of your fingers. Like we live in such a wonderful age to where almost everything is accessible on the internet if you have a smartphone. And that's not too much to ask for a family to have a smartphone at this point, or even your public library, right?
Yeah.
So
how many homeless people have you seen have a smartphone?
90% of them, maybe 80%, but still,
it's
like
quite a few.
It's a huge portion of them. It's a boon, right? So it's a pretty low bar to be able to get one at this point. So yeah, I would honestly say YouTube. Pick up some videos on some places, some relevant martial arts. Even type it into Chat GPT and say like, hey, statistically, what are the best self-defense techniques for survival? Like you could do so many different things to get yourself like the ball rolling, and then just start opening up all of these wonderful worlds of self-defense at that point.
Sure.
So I would definitely say utilize the internet. It works on your own time. If you only got 10 minutes, you can watch a 10-minute video, or even if it's a 50-minute video, pause for that 10 minutes, take care of your kids, change the diapers. Once you get them back down, guess what? You get to focus on it again for another 10 minutes and do it at your own time.
Absolutely.
So I would highly recommend that.
All right, man. Well, do you have any last kind of tips or lasting thoughts before we close this podcast episode out?
Lasting tips or thoughts for the general individual and even the security guard. I think too many times people are so intent on trying to control their emotions, and I actually think it's a really bad idea. What you need to do is to be able to control your actions. No matter what, like bottom line, your emotions are your emotions. You're going to feel how you're going to feel. Internalize that. Let that be okay. How you choose to respond to those emotions directly dictate actually what your result is. So there's times where some people say some stuff and I'm pissed off. I want to punch them in the throat. I want to hurt them. I want to cause pain, right? Like it does happen. I'm guilty of it. I'm not a perfect human being, but I still have a smile on and I still address the situation how I should. People should be focusing more on their actions with those emotions as opposed to trying to just bottle up those emotions and not feel the way they feel. It's just silly.
Absolutely, man.
I would actually just encourage that.
All right, man. Well, thanks again, brother. I appreciate you. And
Always,
thanks for taking the time and sharing, man. Really do appreciate it.
For sure, man. Anytime.
All right, guys, and that is it for this episode. If you really enjoyed this episode and you got something out of it learning from Dante, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe on YouTube and follow the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Give us a 5-star review or a comment down in the YouTube comment section below this video. And for those that are listening, thank you for following. And with that being said, guys, if you have any other questions or requests like you sometimes do, please feel free to reach out at adam@smartsafedefense.com, and I will be sure to put that in the next upcoming content, whether it be the podcast episode or in tutorials that are going to be on YouTube very soon. So thanks again. Be sure to train today so that you can protect tomorrow. I will catch you guys next time.